Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome back from lunch. We hope everyone has had enough to eat. We'd also like to thank you so much for your patience and understanding as we've had to do a little bit of rearranging with our program today. We weren't able to provide a question and answer period at the end of the last panel, but we did have a couple questions for Mr. Larry Perez, the Director of the Department of Public Works. So we'll have him come up and answer those questions before we get started with the last part of our program. Mr. Perez?
Thank you very much. Just for your information, if you need more questions answered, we do have some members from the USDA here as well that can field any questions. I need to feel in good company here. The presentation that DPW did had to do with the transformation of transportation for those of you who just came in. And here's the first question. What do you know about the surveying in the Paga Mangilao area? And does this have to do with military buildup and relocation of Chamorro Trust clients for their military target range area? What do I know? Well, from our vantage point, at least the DPW, we have to take a look at all the EISs that are out there. One of them is the Mariana Islands Range Complex, which is another EIS in and of itself, and then of course is the Marine Relocation EIS. It's all public information, as you well know. In that document, or you will know when you read the document, there's representations about firing ranges, and in that area there is a proposal for a firing range. So wherever you find firing ranges, again, all public information, wherever you find firing ranges, you do not want to have any residents or any humans in harm's way. If the firing range is in this area and they need to shoot in that direction, then obviously you need to vacate this area. So they are vetting the process, they are doing the surveys, they are doing what they need to do to ascertain who's there, what we need to do to assure that this is a safe situation. But it's all a alternative. There is no definitive answer out there. So I just want to represent that we do know that it is one of the alternatives, but it's not been defined as of yet. To what extent will bicycle paths be included in plans for road construction and improvement? There's a local public law that was adopted that requires that in the construct of all DPW roadways that it provision for bicycle paths. We are already doing that. It's actually a requirement that we're imposing in all our designs. The first case where you'll see a bicycle path will be in this Route 4 reconstruction from the bottom of McDonald's here in Agana, going towards along Route 4 all the way towards the Route 4 and 10 intersection, which is the Manibusan area. So that whole stretch is going to have a bicycle path on one side of the road. We're also going to do it in the Alligator Road, which is Route 26, and that's from the Airport Bypass Road underpass, down towards Matete Road. So there's two areas, and then as we progress in the design and construct of our roadways, we are going to be incorporating bike paths. The third question, thank you, it's the final one. With the anticipated buildup, there also should be an increased number of building permits issued and increased revenue from these permits. Will these funds and other funds received by DPW be enough to staff and be able to adequately inspect and certify the work of contractors? Yes, with the buildup, especially those requirements outside the fence, there's a requirement that you pay a building plan permit review fee as well as a building construction fee. One of these fees goes to the Guam Historic Preservation Trust for protecting our history and all the archives and the structures out there. The other fee goes to General Fund Oblivion. So my bottom line is that none of that money comes to DPW. In fact, that section is actually funded by our Guam Highway Fund. Ironic, it's highway funding buildings, but it is what it is. So to pointedly answer your question, DPW's monies or allocations of funds for providing the resources in terms of hardware, software, vehicles, and personnel is coming from our highway fund, and it has been status quo, if not diminishing. So we don't have the wherewithal to monitor and regulate the building construction in terms of the high-level planning in the future at the Land Use Commission level to actually inspecting. So what we are doing in light of this limitation is that we are now migrating to have our staff become construction and program managers, basically manage the program, and we are now going to be outsourcing a lot of the mundane minutia to third-party reviewers, local contractors to actually do the plan review, the inspections, and we just assure that they do it properly, and we stamp it with the government signature when they pass muster. So that's our action plan, and those are the questions I have. Thank you. Unless you have any other questions? Ooh, there's more. Yes, sir.
Employing just compensation and due process under the eminent domain. Because it appears that a lot of the road expansion does not have any background of any public law that authorizes the land taking to expand a road from what was originally a 40 feet road to a 60 feet road to a 100 feet road width. And as far as I can articulate, if that was not done, then all the expansion of the roads that are ongoing are being done illegally. Can you say something about that?
Yes, yes. Actually, sir, you are correct in pretty much every aspect. Can I just elaborate from the DPW's perspective to affirm exactly what you said? In decades past, yes, there's been a lot of creation and paving of roads. We have not, without the proper eminent domain and condemnation proceeding and procedure. So DPW now is having to contend with cleaning up those acts. On a going forward basis, though, DPW does have the authority to proceed in the proper taking, and that includes, and in a very fundamental way, the survey, the appraisal, 2 appraisals, and then the settlement with we're trying to settle out of court filings with the landowners, and hopefully this agreement. If not, then there's a proper filing with the court, at which time there's an immediate taking once we file the check. So there is a procedure, there is an authority granted, but it's on a going forward basis. If there's ever a need to widen a road from the 40 to 60 to 100 feet, those procedures have to be followed. And I must make mention that there is a bill out there that was passed by this body. It's referring to the Rights of Way Manual that actually outlines all those activities to assure that we comply with it.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. And before we step, there is no authorization by law to do what you're doing. All these road projects you grind to a hole, and our legal system must take hold and stop this injustice. But we can't be moving this way, Mr. Aguirre. And if we can't stop and follow the right procedure by law, we're going to continue to do this. And yet we're going to talk about democracy and freedom. And yet we're violating the very rights of our people. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Okay, I hope I don't mess up the question, but I'll try. Is DPW coordinating and planning with folks on improving and expanding our public transportation system? Okay. Yes, we are. Actually, in our presentation, we represent, that's one of the four main subcomponents of our 2030, 20-year plan, our Guam Transportation Plan. One of them is about $138 million worth of improvements to our regional transit authority system. And that includes, we actually outline all the routes for fixed routes, for, let me see, I forget the name of the customers, but basically for all the routing systems, the fixed routes for public transportation, for school systems, for paratransit, there you go, paratransit services, and the like. So basically, yes, we are part of that program. It is embedded in our 20-year program. We are liaising with the Guam Regional Transit Authority. We're working with the Federal Transit Administration and the Federal Highway Administration to bring that to fruition. So yes, we are developing the plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Perez, and thanks again for being patient with us as we let him address those questions. If there are any other questions from panel 3 because we didn't give you an opportunity, please do let us know and we'll arrange for your questions to be answered afterwards. At this time, we're going to get into the last part of our conference program, and we're going to present to you our 4th panel on an issue that is just as sensitive as it is important, and that is federal-territorial relations. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for panel 4, Ms. Debbie Kanata, Magat Haga, Chamorro Nation.
I feel rather tall. Jesus Mase, Stephanie. Thank you very much. I am honored to be here to introduce the members of this particular panel. Unfortunately, the president of the university, Dr. Robert Underwood, was unable to be with us today, but do know that he has and continues to be well represented with the faculty and the students and the staff of the University of Guam that have participated in this forum and many other forums prior to this one. So I'd like to thank Dr. Underwood for all the work that he's done and all the staff and the professors up at the university. They've done a fantastic job of doing exactly what a university is intended to do. Seek to stimulate thought, critical thinking, and the desire to pursue higher education. And I think that we are blessed and have many that are of fine mind. That being said, I'd now like to take the time to introduce the panel that we have with us this afternoon. All very knowledgeable people, and I think we'll be able to maybe liven up the folks after the heavy meal that's just been consumed. This particular panel has a very interesting challenge ahead of them. One of the most, I think, important portions of this proposed buildup is the actual federal and territorial relations. We have with us today several members of the community and elected representatives and professors and with much knowledge that I think they can impart. I'd like to take this time now to introduce, I'm looking for, oh, that's right, you know what, I did it again. I was thinking that Frank Uggan, I'm looking for your counterpart on the other side. I'm so used to seeing Frank Blas, and I'm saying, is there another person that I'm missing? I'd like to take this time to introduce the panel as they are seated. The Honorable Senator Ben Pangilinan. our honorable senator will be speaking on the topic of Chamorro self-determination. It's a very important issue. Thank you very much. Yes, sir, please. Thank you.
We not only need to widen our highways, we need to widen our corridors. Because there's some wide loads up here. Buenas, mananas idus, minauling na taluani para amjus todos, dangkulo na minagov pa na taluani ni para sinya tafanakwintusi, pudesti asuntun Chamorro self-determination. Good afternoon. I want to thank, of course, our guests, our hosts, Senator Judy Gutherts and Senator Roy Respicio, for this opportunity to deal with the issue of Chamorro self-determination and give you my perspectives on it. On this conference para Inasuntautauguahan, the military buildup and beyond. Over 3,600 years ago, before the Europeans bumped into our small island chain, and 3,830 years ago, before my grandmother was born, and 3,887 years ago, before I was born, the Chamorro people sailed the oceans and lived on this land they called Guahan. While we may assume that all was well, there were turmoils and fights among the natives as territories were established, villages were staked out, and boundaries were defended. Then in 1668, they came to settle, bringing their own social and religious systems, work, faith, institutions to make our heathen lives civilized and whole. Some of the natives succumbed and converted. Magalahis, Hiniti, Hihi, Su'un, and Odo fought on the sides of the occupiers and were rewarded with title and status. Hurao, Ahugao, Hula, Chaifi, Matapang, and Tolahi, and many others resisted and fought these outsiders. They resisted and waged fierce battles to preserve what was ours, our land, sea, and the fruits and bounties that were ours. They believed it was more important to live as we knew how and to serve our wants and needs as we saw fit. The resistance lasted for over 27 years and resulted in bloodshed. From the very beginning, the people strongly resisted and would not abandon their ancient customs and bowing to the authority of the Spaniards. Governor de la Corta wrote in his Memoria, "One does not know which to admire most, whether the tenacity of the Spaniards in conflicts with the elements against a cunning and treacherous people during no less than 20 years of resistance, or that of the natives pursuing such a cruel and prolonged war, which could only end in their annihilation and ruin." The truth of these words are reflected in the Rudecion, which sought to convert the natives marked by the killing of Salvatores in 1672 and ended in 1698, which saw the reduction of the people from an estimated 60 to 100,000 at the time of discovery to just 3,678, according to the 1710 census, a mere 12 years after the end of the war. Insight to the determination of the Chamorros to defy the occupiers and face certain annihilation and ruin is most clearly articulated by Chief Hurao. The Europeans would have done better to remain in their own country. We have no need of their help to live happily. They take away from us the primitive simplicity in which we live. They dare to take away our liberty, which should be dearer to us than life itself. They try to persuade us that we will be happier, and some of us have been blinded into believing their words. But can we have such sentiments if we reflect that we have been covered with misery and illness ever since those foreigners has come to disturb our peace? For what purpose do they teach us except to make us adopt their customs, to subject us to their laws, and to lose the precious liberty left to us by our ancestors? We are stronger than we think. We can quickly free ourselves from these foreigners. We must regain our former freedom. But heart and determination was not enough to overcome the resources and the advanced weapons of the occupiers. For over the next 200 plus years, the people lived under the control and domination of this outside metropolitan government. Then in 1898, as part of the spoils of the Spanish-American War, a new domination was begun, this time under the control of the United States of America. While the Spanish used force, faith, and bullets to impose their will, this new power was more beguiling, using seduction and law to get their way. An interesting fact of the event of this war, which placed Guam under the United States, was that it was declared after the passage of the Teller Amendment to ensure that the United States would not establish permanent control over Cuba following the cessation of hostilities with Spain. The amended resolution demanded the Spanish withdrawal and authorized the president to use as much military force as he thought necessary to help Cuba gain independence from Spain. Of the 4 territories taken by the United States as a result of the war, Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, Puerto Rico and Guam continued to be under the administrative control of the United States. While the new occupier had a different approach towards the natives, they had one thing in common with the old. They imposed a government upon us, not of our own choosing. In 1898 did not only bring a new occupying government over the people of Guam, it also brought a new occupant to Guam, and that was my grandmother, who was born on this island. For the next 4 decades, the United States wielded its authority over the people, making decisions which suited their needs and determined for us what our needs were. And once again, our leaders rose up to regain our rights as a people in our own land. Using reason and law, the weapons of the new occupiers, instead of sword and violence of the old, our leaders fought for our rights to govern ourselves and determine for ourselves what is best for our people. And once again, the occupiers' resources overwhelmed the meager resources of our people. They denied this right to self-determination to ourselves and our sisters in waiting, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. And once again, war came, and the geopolitical events affecting independent states brought to us domination and occupation of a new power, as Japan invaded Guam and began a short era of foreign domination over us. Again, our people resisted and fought, while the United States gathered their people and left the Chamorros behind to deal with the invading enemy. The need for a base of operations to defeat the Japanese saw the return of the Americans as she reclaimed her lost territory. As part of the structure of the New World Order and the states of the world organized as a United Nations dedicated to resolving future dispute in a peaceful manner, and recognized the need to respect and honor the rights of those people liberated from domination of the war. The signatory states to the United Nations Charter freely agreed to obligate themselves and accept responsibility for the, quote, administration of territories whose people have not yet attained a full measure of self-government, recognize the principle that the interests of the inhabitants of these territories are paramount, and that to this end they would seek to develop self-government to take due account of the political aspirations of the people and to assist them in the progressive development of their free political institutions according to the particular circumstance of each territory and its people and their varying stages of advancement from the United Nations Charter. At the signing of the Charter, the United Nations placed nearly 100 nations were voluntarily placed on the list of non-self-governing territories by the signatory states, which held these places before World War II, and entrusted to them the administration of the affairs to be governed according to the Charter. The United States, as part of this event, accepted the obligation over Guam, American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. Since the establishment of the list, over 80 of the territories from the original list of non-self-governing territories have been shepherded by their administrative authority through the process of self-determination by the free expression of the people. Despite this progress, by 1960, the General Assembly believed that the pace of decolonization of the non-self-governing territories, which still included Guam, was too slow and adopted two landmark resolutions. The Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, which marked a shift from the principle of self-determination for these territories to all peoples have the right to self-determination. It further states that all people have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. From Resolution 1514, Chapter 15. A component to that declaration of colonial people, Resolution 1514, set forth the three ways in which these territories can attain a full measure of self-determination as envisioned in the Charter. One was, of course, free association with an independent state as a result of the voluntary choice expressed through an informed and a democratic process. And B, an integration with an independent state on the basis of complete equality between the peoples of the non-self-governing territory and the independent state. And the third option was independence. Whatever the option chosen by the people of the non-self-governing territory, it must be the result of the freely expressed wishes of these people. As of today, there remain 16 non-self-governing territories from the original list of close to 100 who have yet to exercise self-determination and freely express their choice. Guam, the Virgin Islands, and American Samoa, all administered by the United States as part of the last remaining 16. There have been attempts by administrating authorities to redefine not only the process of self-determination and decolonization, but the status of self-government as well. Decolonization is what happens when one exercises self-determination. It is direct democracy and affirmative action freely expressed by the people themselves. Guam officially became a territory under the sovereignty of the United States on April 11, 1899, when the Treaty of Paris between the United States and Spain was ratified into law. With respect to governing the people of Guam, Article 9 of the Treaty of Paris declared that the civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants shall be determined by the Congress. The placement of Guam with the United Nations list of non-self-governing territory and the acceptance of the United Nations charters and resolutions and its processes for granting the rights of the people of Guam to freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, in my opinion, confers upon the people of Guam the rights contained in the applicable United Nations processes. The petition for citizenship and the subsequent granting of such citizenship by the Organic Act is consistent with the responsibility of the United States as the administrating authority over Guam to, quote, provide progressive development of their free political institutions, and in no way can be defended as the free expression of the people of Guam. Acceptance of such incremental development and the improvement in such status is not the free exercise of choosing such status, and most certainly not the will of the people. It is still a will imposed upon the people, no matter how generous, no matter how benevolent, no matter how good the administrating authority is. The true test of their goodness is to see what happens when we say we want to decide on our own and they have not been too good. When we talk about self-determination, One of the most key elements, of course, is the free and educated exercise of that people's right in determining for themselves. This is why it is so important that the United States government funds the education process so that the choices do not come down purely to the options that are offered by those who have the most money to present their options. Educated choice is an essential element in the exercise of self-determination, and a road for each option must offer each the promise and the reality that is, in fact, educated and freely accepted. The clearest example of the people's through, though, as supported by United Nations Charter of who is vested with this right to self-determination are the colonial peoples in the non-self-governing territories. And this is, of course, defined in the United Nations Charter as those native inhabitants of Guam. The struggle for Guam, for the people of Guam's efforts to exercise the right to self-determination, as recognized under the international law, took, of course, concrete form in 1973 with the creation of the Guam Legislature's Political Status Commission. Members highlighted Guam's second-class U.S. citizen and debated whether self-determination should be restricted to voters of Chamorro ancestry. Following these efforts, a special commission on the political status of Guam was established, leading to Guam's first political status plebiscite in 1976. The plebiscite was open to all the voters of Guam, with a majority selecting the unambiguous option of improved status quo. In 1977, a federally sanctioned constitutional convention resulted in the draft of a constitution that was approved by the Congress and signed by the President, but ultimately rejected by the people of Guam. Back to the drawing board in 1980, the new Commission on Self-Determination approved another status plebiscite, which was once again open to all the registered voters. The plebiscite was held in 1982, and when none of the 7 available status options achieved a majority, a runoff was held with the choice of Commonwealth status overwhelmingly defeated statehood. This set the course for the next 15 years as Guam's leaders unsuccessfully petitioned Congress and the President to approve the Guam Commonwealth Act. The death knell for Guam's quest for Commonwealth was a 1997 congressional hearing before the House Resources Committee, in which it became clear that Guam's leaders and federal officials would not be able to bridge the fundamental differences over the deal-breaker issues of Chamorro self-determination, mutual consent, and immigration. It is from this failure to bridge that gap in which the people of Guam and the leaders of Guam turned to the international basis of the right of the people of Guam to self-determination as embodied by the acceptance of the United States of the Charter of the United Nations and acceptance of the resolutions of the United Nations, which clearly outline the process for the decolonization of a people that remained under the list of non-self-governing territories. This foray into accepting a constitution, drafting a constitution, voting on a constitution, without the freely expressed wishes of the people as to the political status upon which this constitution will be used to govern the territory and non-self-governing territory of Guam is what is missing. And from that failure, the direction has changed, and it is now the policy of the people of Guam to seek first the expression of our right to self-determination through the freely exercised vote on a plebiscite for the statuses available to us under the United Nations articles and resolutions. And no granting of any amount of self-governance without the people of Guam freely voting on that is in any way can be interpreted as an expression and the fulfillment of the right of the people of Guam to self-determination. We look forward to this continued effort, continued quest for the people of Guam, the colonized people of Guam, to be able to exercise and make their fully educated choice on the options presented to us under the UN Charter and UN resolution to fulfill the right of self-determination inherent in a people subjugated and dominated by administrating powers over the last 10 decades. Thank you, and si Diyos masi todo santo.
Tangkulan sa Diyos masi Senador. I now have the honor of introducing our next speaker, a good friend, the Honorable Senator Frank Blas. And although I kind of blew that a little bit, I'm not going to do him the disservice of not announcing that he will be speaking on the Compact Impact Reimbursements. Tizos Masi, Senator.
Jesus Masi, thank you very much, Debbie. And first off, I'd like to thank Senator Respicio and Senator Guthertz, along with the students and faculty of the School of Business and Public Administration, the University of Guam, for putting together this very informative conference and forum. And most especially for those of you who've taken the time to come out and listen to all the presentations and all the discussions that are going on. It's an honor to be able to stand here before you. It's more an honor to be able to be amongst this esteemed panel that is going to talk to you about some of the issues that may not necessarily directly relate to the military buildup, but just as importantly need to be addressed. I believe that over the last day and a half, you have participated in discussions relative to the concerns and challenges that our island will have with this buildup. But I think that also that as a result of this buildup, it provides us the opportunity to address some of those unresolved issues that we have with the federal government. One of those unresolved issues is the reimbursement of our costs for providing services to individuals who have migrated here as allowed by the Compacts of Free Association. Since the implementation of the Compact of Free Association of 1985, Guam has incurred millions of dollars in expenses to provide services to citizens of the freely associated states. The United States Congress, in their wisdom and foresight of the financial impact that the act would have on the territories, commonwealths, and states that the FAS citizens migrate to, included provisions in the act that would allow for the redress of the adverse consequences. Despite these provisions and the continuous attempts by the government of Guam to recoup the actual amount spent on direct services to these citizens, the reimbursements have never equaled to at least half of what was spent annually. Over the last 23 years of providing these services and never getting fully reimbursed for costs associated with these services, Guam is owed over $400 million for providing these services under the Compacts of Free Association. We are currently faced with a situation where the cost of providing government services and the amounts owed by the government far exceed what we can collect. Although there are many ideas to address the imbalance, pursuit of this monies owed by the government for proper reimbursements of the financial impact of the Compacts of Free Association Act is necessary to not hinder the operations of the government and will not cause any additional financial burden on the people of Guam. I'll give you a little bit of a background of the Compacts of Free Association. The Compact of Free Association Act of 1985, under United States Public Law 99-239, implemented in 1986, established the relationship between the United States and the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. The Compact of Free Association Act for Palau, under Public Law 99-658, implemented in 1994, established the relationship between the United States and the Republic of Palau. Compact immigration provisions in both those acts authorized this unrestricted immigration into the United States, its territories and possessions, enabling citizens of these three areas to enter into, lawfully engage in occupations and establish residence as non-immigrant aliens. There were specific sections in the public laws that established these compacts that addressed some of the concerns and the issues that we had. Section 104E1 of the Act, statement of congressional intent, reads, "In approving the compact, it is not the intent of the Congress to cause any adverse consequences for the United States territories and commonwealths or the state of Hawaii." Section 104E4 of that Act, commitment of Congress to redress adverse consequences. It reads as follows: "The Congress hereby declares that if any adverse consequences to the United States territories and commonwealths or the state of Hawaii result from the implementation of the Compact of Free Association, the Congress will act sympathetically and expeditiously to redress those adverse consequences." Section 104E6, impact costs, it reads as follows: "They are hereby authorized to be appropriated for fiscal years beginning after September 30, 1985, such sums as may be necessary to cover the costs, if any, incurred by the state of Hawaii, the territories of Guam and American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, resulting from any increased demands placed on educational and social services by immigrants from the Marshall Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia." Section 104E6 of Public Law 99-658 had the same verbiage for the impact costs. In recognition of the adverse impact that it has caused, in 2001, the United States General Accounting Office was directed by various members of Congress to review the migration provisions of the compacts to include assessing the impacts of the migration on the U.S. island areas. The conclusions of the report reads as follows: FAS migration has clearly had a significant impact on Guam, Hawaii, and the CNMI, and has required government services in key areas. Compact migrants have required local expenditures in areas such as health and education, and further have particularly affected the budgetary resources of Guam and the CNMI, U.S. island locations that have relatively small populations and budgets, and economies that have recently suffered economic setbacks. The budgetary impact on Hawaii is relatively smaller, but can be expected to grow as Hawaii begins to absorb healthcare costs that were once covered by the U.S. government. This is very interesting because over 3 months ago, the state of Hawaii, facing its budgetary shortfalls, actually came out with a provision, legislation that would restrict providing healthcare to FAS citizens. And as a result of that because of that restriction, that caused a stir and a concern amongst FAS residents on Guam and in CNMI on whether and how they were going to be able to continue to pay for their healthcare costs. Public health problems are also an important concern for all 3 U.S. island areas, because the compact allows FAS migrants who have limited financial means and ability to pay for healthcare to enter the United States with few restrictions. U.S. island areas are absorbing much of the healthcare costs of this poor population. Further, Guam, Hawaii, and the CNMI can be expected to continue to experience compact impact as long as current prior economic conditions persist in the FSM and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Targeting future United States assistance to the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of Marshall Islands for education and health purposes could reduce some of the motivation to migrate, and improvements in migrant health and education status might be expected to reduce migrant impact in these U.S. destinations. In September 7, 2001, a letter from the Department of Interior Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget to the General Accounting Office Director of International Affairs and Trade wrote, "The issues raised by Micronesian migration are not fundamentally different from those raised by other immigrant groups. However, because of the compact relationship, the United States has a special responsibility to the migrants, their home areas, and the communities that receive them." On December 17, 2003, President George W. Bush signed Public Law 108-188, which amended the Compacts of Free Association with the Federated States of Micronesia and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and address the impact of the compacts that it had on the state of Hawaii, Guam, and the CNMI, and also provided a reconciliation of unreimbursed impact expenses. This is the same law that authorized the $30 million annually that we see today that aids in defraying the costs incurred by compact impact. Questions have been raised on how Congress came up with that $30 million figure for the annual disbursement and the language used to define what the payments are for. In discussions that we've had with individuals who were intimately involved with the renegotiations or the formation of Public Law 108-188, there was no rhyme or reason as to why they came up with a $30 million figure. It was an arbitrary figure that was pulled out of the air, and there was further concern as to where that money can come from. According to the information that had been provided, that money was actually slated for the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands to be able to improve their infrastructure as a result of their covenant agreement with the United States in the establishment of their covenant. So that $30 million belongs to the CNMI. Section 104E3 of Public Law 108-188 states that the Secretary of Interior is authorized and appropriated $30 million for each year from 2004 to 2023 for grants to affected jurisdictions to aid in defraying costs incurred as a result of the increased demands placed by qualified non-immigrants from the freely associated states. In April 2004, a report to the Department of Interior, Guam's unreimbursed costs for the period of fiscal year 1987 to fiscal year 2003 was reported to be $269,313,119. This report provided an explanation of the methodology used to determine the amount that included service cost determination, displacement costs, direct payments, and sources of information and data. This was very significant in that a number of the conversations and a number of discussions that the government of Guam has been having with the Department of Interior was a concern with regards to the methodology that is being used to provide these figures. The methodology that was used to come up with these figures were actually as a result of discussions that the government of Guam had with the Department of Interior in exchange for a lawsuit that was filed by then Senator Carlotta Leongoro against the United States government for their failure to report the adverse impacts or the adverse consequences of the Compacts of Free Association to the United States Congress. In that discussion, there was the formulation. As a matter of fact, the Department of Interior provided Guam technical assistance in being able to develop the methodology. Years later, the discussion on the methodology used to be able to come up with these figures again is becoming an issue. In January 2008, another report was prepared by the government of Guam, and it provided that for fiscal years 2004 to 2007, the total cost for services provided to the FAS citizens totaled $138,339,950. The report further provided that during the reporting period, Guam received $14,242,322 annually as a result of the authorization provided in Public Law 108-188. Subtracting the annual allocation from the cost of providing those services, Guam was still owed in fiscal years 2004 to 2007 at least $81,430,662. The chart here basically shows a breakdown from the fiscal years, basically 1985 to 2007, not including 1987 and 2000, actually in 2009. Those costs. Those costs today, if we were to use using the same methodology, those costs run us to about $451 million in the amount that is owed to Guam for the services provided on the Compacts of Free Association. Mind you, these costs do not include those costs associated with displacement costs, or those costs as a result of, according to the methodology used, Guam cannot use the amounts that we lose when it is one of our citizens is displaced or cannot enter into a federally funded program because that place or that position is taken by an FAS citizen. That does not include the amounts of money that Guam spends, that Guam has to pay in the unfunded tax federal mandate called the Earned Income Tax Credit. According to reports from the Department of Revenue and Taxation, those figures can average roughly around $256 million more. As a result of the census that was taken by the Department of Interior in 2008, Guam's share of the $30 million is now $16.8 million. I bring this up because also last year the Department of Education provided a study that showed that it cost about $6,000 or $6,200 per student to provide them the basic educational services in the Department of Education. There are reportedly over 5,000 FAS students from the freely associated states in the Department of Education system. Doing the simple math of $6,000 or roughly $6,000 per student times 5,000 students is $30 million. I bring this up because in recent conversations that we had today, this whole concern with regards to where we're going to get the money to be able to help the Department of Education continue to provide their services to those children with special needs and special education. I know where there's $400 million. Thank you very much.
Senator. At this time, I'd like to introduce, I do believe that this gentleman is the Assistant Attorney General. Am I correct, Mr. Tedinko? Chief Prosecutor, yes. Yes, he is the Deputy Attorney General. That's exactly what I thought I was supposed to say. I'd like to introduce this very astute man, the Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Phil Tedinko. He will be speaking on legal issues regarding the military buildup. Jesus Masit Peretratomo Pago.
Thank you, Deborah. And buenas tardes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Attorney General Alicia Limtiaco and the Office of the Attorney General, she sends her regrets for not being able to attend this afternoon's panel. Our office had previously communicated that the Attorney General had a number of prior commitments, and so I hope you don't mind that the second string has been called in, but please bear with me in responding. In addition, too, I'd like to just also clarify, I know that in the agenda, and we weren't able to have this changed in time, the topic indicates legal strategies for enhancing federal territorial relations. We believe that's sort of a misnomer because, as you know, lawyers, we usually think of legal strategies in the context of courts and lawsuits and cases, and those are not typically the ways that one enhances relationships between parties. But given the nature of this conference, perhaps a more responsive, informative topic for us to present or comment on would be legal issues and the impact upon the Office of the Attorney General by the military buildup, which we have also previously recommended as part of our participation in this panel. As you folks know, over the next several years, our island will see a population increase unlike any we've seen in past decades. As tens of thousands of U.S. Armed Forces members and their families and dependents, civilians and immigrant workers associated with the buildup will begin calling this island their home. In short, the buildup will completely transform Guam by compressing decades of growth to within just a short few years. Our office recognizes this, as well as the legal and socio-economic problems that will accompany it. Much dialogue has been exchanged and information shared to prepare as best as possible for this impending buildup and the population boom. Much work has and continues to be done too, but more information needs to be gathered. As you know, our office currently is comprised of 4 divisions. We have the Prosecution Division, our Civil Litigation Solicitor Division, our Family Juvenile Division, and our Child Support Enforcement Division. At present, prosecution operates with 16 attorneys, the Civil Division with 14 attorneys, Child Support with 5, and our Family Juvenile Division with 4 attorneys. In addition to that, we also have roughly 70 support staff, or between 50 to 70 support staff at any given time. Our office participates in large-scale discussions on global international issues that affect or could affect Guam, ranging from the H1N1 virus and legal issues related to that, SARS. We provide legal counsel to Guam Homeland Security and Department of Public Social Services. We investigate possible consumer protection violations in areas such as telemarketing fraud, identity, internet fraud. These are new areas. We have provided comments as an active member and in unity with the National Association of Attorney Generals, comments for the transition brief that was submitted to President Obama as part of our membership into the United States Department of Interior. In that comment, our office has advocated several issues, and in particular, we brought focus and attention in this same transition report about the impending military buildup, as well as the anticipated civilian population influx consisting of support personnel, contractors, construction workers, and their families. Further, our office has conveyed the government of Guam's concern regarding the buildup on our legal and criminal justice system infrastructure, law enforcement, educational, healthcare, public health, and social service areas, as well as our environment, marine resources and ecology, air, quality, surface, water, public utilities, transportation, cultural interests, and other concerns which do implicate many of our rules and regulations that we have promulgated in our island. As presented by our office on the transition brief, the population increase due to the military buildup requires a critical review and assessment, and increased provision and support of current legal, criminal, and court systems and other infrastructure. Federal grant assistance has to be expanded from various programs, including those sponsored by the United States Department of Justice, United States Department of Defense, United States Department of Interior, including funding assistance in the field of criminal investigation, prosecution, and for law enforcement and prosecution personnel and victim-oriented services. Some of the questions we get asked is, how is our organization, how is the AG's office planning to provide additional services for a larger population? What can we do, or what do we have in place in order to be prepared for this population influx? Since coming into the office a little more than 2 years ago, Attorney General Lim Tiaco in our office has advocated and pursued with all our branches, executive, legislative, for budgets to meet these duties and mandates. Unfortunately, it's been difficult for all agencies, not just ours, to get the required and requested level each fiscal years, which in turn makes it difficult for us to currently safeguard and protect the public interest of our current 170 to 175,000 residents, which I'm told by all estimates may increase with the buildup eventually to somewhere in the neighborhood of 225,000. In short, our office will need more high caliber attorneys, legal support staff, and critical funding for special prosecutors and expert witnesses. As a multifaceted agency, the impact of the impending military buildup will affect all missions of our office. As you know, our prosecution division is primarily responsible for the prosecution of all adult felonies and misdemeanors referred to by our law enforcement authorities, and as well as conducting our own independent criminal investigations. This division currently handles approximately 13,000 open cases, criminal cases. The shortage of senior prosecutors today with extensive prosecutorial experience and training, coupled with this extraordinary increase of cases likely to occur with the buildup, will increase the average caseload of prosecutors to over 500. Combined with the lack of legal, investigative, and support staff to assist prosecutors further compounds these problems. These circumstances will seriously impede the division's ability, prosecution's ability to vigorously prepare cases for prosecution and pursue justice, not merely to convict, but pursue justice. And that includes making decisions to exculpate, free people when it's necessary to do so. Our family division, which represents the Child Protective Services, the Department of Public Health and Social Services, also participates in the adjudicatory processes of our family court or the Superior Court pertaining to juvenile criminal offenses, juvenile delinquency, and special proceedings involving the need to safeguard and protect children who have been abused and neglected. This division at present only has 4 attorneys and 5 support staff, and would need a substantial increase in personnel and equipment to efficiently and effectively handle the predicted increase in cases juvenile family courts. Last year, the Family Division filed 665 cases involving juveniles, a number that is predicted to grow with the buildup. Child Support Enforcement Division. Uniquely, our Attorney General Office, unlike many Attorney General offices across the nation, enforces child support. And it's foreseeable that we will see an increase in this workload as a direct result of the buildup. At present, there are only 5 attorneys handling these cases, and we believe that eventually with the buildup, they'll be overwhelmed. Currently, we service more than 14,700 children, about a fourth of all of Guam's children, through the child support services, and that was in 2008. And there are only 2 investigators to help with that. They've assisted more than 9,600 walk-in clients seeking support for their children. They've conducted 5,400 child support hearings in 2008, and they field on an average over 1,000 telephone calls regarding child support. Our Civil Litigation and Solicitors Division, which handles civil actions in which the government is an interested party, and in matters of public interest, we also anticipate seeing an appreciable increase of our activities as a result of the buildup. This does not take into consideration the larger volume of government-related contracts for goods and services that we currently review through our office, as well as contractual disputes and the request for legal opinions and interpretations, procurement-related issues and protests, fraudulent schemes, and consumer protection matters. At present, this division also has to provide legal assistance and counsel or be available to do so to nearly 55 governmental agencies, board, and commissions. But there are only 7 attorneys in the solicitors unit and only 7 in the civil litigation unit, with 2 secretaries for that entire, legal secretaries for that entire division. Last year, the civil division had 1,153 requests for attorney assistance, including contract review and for administrative proceedings. They opened 473 litigation cases, many of which required and demanded the work of multiple attorneys on one case at times, given the complexity of such litigation. As part of conducting our office's due diligence in an effort to have a more comprehensive understanding of this military buildup and its impact to Guam, we believe that it's important to obtain, perhaps this might be a form of a legal strategy, memorandums of understandings or memorandums of agreement in place between ourselves and the U.S. military to formalize cooperation between our organizations on matters of mutual concern, especially in the area of law enforcement as it relates to crime and violence. The feedback we receive has been similar, if not identical, that Guam's legal community will see and feel a very obvious impact from the buildup. This impact to Guam is very unique. It does not only involve an increase of personnel, but it will also involve the influx of civilians and immigrant workers, some of whose backgrounds will be unknown to us and other authorities. In one particular series of discussions with an expert in the field, it was noted that one of the challenges in situations where there's rapid growth is that such growth can be disorienting and create its own source of problems, especially in a remote and multicultural and diverse society like Guam, making Guam's future rapid growth and impact unique. The rapid population growth and rapid social change may create a situation where norms become unstable, showing itself in an increase in criminal activity, which can include assaults, DUIs, family violence, child mistreatment and abuse, sexual abuse, prostitution, human trafficking, drugs, property-related offenses. Issues such as wage and hour and other labor-related matters and immigration problems are also anticipated to arise. Thus, these issues involving rapid socioeconomic changes, unstable norms, and racial and cultural matters are part of the evaluation that we must come to understand or need to understand or must try to find out how to understand it and meet it in preparation for the buildup. It would not be unreasonable to anticipate that as the military build-up brings more military personnel and their dependents in the civilian workforce to support the military mission, which in turn injects enormous economic benefit to our island community, that it may in turn or will in turn attract and draw more in-migration of people from neighboring jurisdictions and islands in the Pacific region, whose fledgling economies are suffering from part of the global economic downturn. To prepare, our office has identified that we must continue working on the recruitment and retention of prosecutors, government attorneys, investigators, victim advocates, and legal support staff. We must receive adequate funding from local and federal resources, apply for as much grants as we can to provide personnel, physical facilities, security of employees and data, including cybersecurity equipment and technical support. More and more, we're noticing that we have to deal with the digital age and its impact in terms of evidence and more internet-related crimes. And so I'd like to end with this, that the Office of the Attorney General will continue and is committed to be transparent and assistive and proactive in our relations with stakeholders of justice, to include all local law enforcement agencies, the judiciary, the public, our nonprofits, the United States Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Interior, United States Department of Defense, and our National Association of AGs and our Conference of Western AGs. As I stated earlier, MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, are very important for us to have in place, perhaps as a legal strategy to address some of these issues that may arise in the legal arena. Thank you very much.
Situs Masi, sir, I think it's very difficult sometimes to speak the truth, and I think we're very grateful that most of everyone that has spoken this afternoon, and I'm sure that the others that will continue to speak, have been very forthright in the very serious concerns that we have on the island. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Babakwa from the University of Guam. I think that he will make an excellent presentation. Sizus Maset Niget.
Hello? Ay. Kailangan filan ni fiesta esti sa Guawi Masobens and Guawi Utimu. Lo, ay de gof nervous sa aten esti pura VIP esti na panel pagods and hadzidzo. Lo, I'm just saying that it's all these VIPs up here and who am I? Hello, what's it called? Kalang maonro jo, you know, station in Teku Pago na makombida jo, zabe kwentusiam jo Pago. By, you know, sa manachosawi Pago sa be na utut na ikwentosu. Because it's almost 3 o'clock. So I'm just gonna, I had a longer presentation prepared, but I'm just gonna cut it short because we're running out of time. For those who don't know, I'm a professor at the University of Guam. I teach Guam history, I teach English, composition. So I am here to talk today about culture. And so I'm gonna, because of the tone that the panel has taken so far and then the topic of this discussion, I'm gonna talk about culture in a very different way than probably you expected or you're used to talking about culture. And so when I always think about culture, I always have a very active image of culture. When most people talk about culture, they're thinking very passively, like it's this very static thing. In most times when you hear culture being talked about, people imagine that culture is something that your grandparents or your parents give to you, and then you just simply give on to the next generation. If something is lost in the process, then you're screwed. That's lost forever. It never comes back. And then you just have to keep whatever they've given you and just give it on to the next one. And that's not the way that I conceive of culture. Culture doesn't work like that. I have a more active view of culture. And I believe that culture is what we make of it. Culture is about evolution. It's about adaptation. It's about choices that people make. And so we can see that clearly in all of our lives. Like the reason why I'm speaking to you in English now instead of Chamorro, it's because a lot of choices were made. There was large choices at the governmental level. There were small choices, personal choices that people made. But ultimately, before World War II on Guam, there was anti-Chamorro policies that the U.S. Navy instituted. And Chamorros at all levels said, you know what, we're not going to accept this. We're going to continue to speak our language. We don't believe in what you're saying, that if we speak our language, it's backwards and it makes us primitive. But then after World War II, everything changed. And that's the way culture works. So afterwards, you had the government of Guam continuing the Navy's anti-Chamorro language policies. And you had Chamorros at all levels making personal decisions that my children will not speak Chamorro. If they continue to speak the language, they will be treated badly in life. They will not have all the opportunities that they should have. And so therefore, I make a personal decision that they shouldn't speak it. And as a result, we have a lot of language loss, a lot of, the language is definitely not healthy today. And so whenever you think of culture, it's all about the choices that you make in your lives. Others make other choices, you make your own choices. And if you choose to keep something healthy, if you choose to keep a practice alive, if you choose that you should do this in your family or in your village, you are participating in the revitalization of your culture. And if something is lost along the way and you would like to bring it back, then that's your prerogative too. If you go out there, there's the Tasi group that is bringing back an art form which was lost hundreds of years ago. And so some people may complain that, well, that was lost and so you can't really bring it back, but so what? Culture is what we make of it. And so if we want to bring that back, then you bring that back. And it's as simple as that. So when you think about culture more like this, then you have to realize that it's not simply the words that people have on their t-shirts when they walk around. Like that's a very narrow view of culture. Culture isn't just a couple of Chamorro words here or there, or a couple of Chamorro ideas here or there. Culture is a force. It's a force that gives identity, it gives strength, it gives frustration sometimes, but it's ultimately this force which binds people together and it determines what they're capable of, what they can do, what they feel they can do in their lives. And so if you have a very weak culture, then you as a people tend to be very weak. You don't think you can do a lot of things. You don't think you're capable of much. If your culture is strong, then it's the complete opposite. You see yourself as being self-determined, as being powerful, as having rights, and being somebody that you can trust in this world to make decisions. And so I say this up front because I have heard a lot of discussions that the military buildup will threaten Guam's culture, that it will lose more culture, and there simply is no equation like that. There is no equation where if X people come to Guam, then Y is the amount of culture that will be lost. It just doesn't work like that at all. But the buildup, however, can affect certain things, and it can influence us in such ways that it can lead to further loss of culture or further disempowerment as a people. And so what I'm going to talk about today is kind of ways in which the buildup can affect our culture and can make Chamorros and Guam in general feel disempowered. And so for the past couple months, for instance, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of concern and worries from people that there's all these rumors in Japan that the buildup won't happen or that it's all going off the track, it's going to be stalled, or who knows what's going to happen. And so when you see people talk about this and if you see panic in their voice or in their face when they talk about it, it's because it's this idea that if this buildup doesn't happen, we can't survive. Or we have so much going on this, we just won't be able to live if this doesn't happen. And that's a key indicator into sort of a weakness in Guam as a society, and a weakness in kind of Chamorro culture, that if the buildup doesn't happen, we wouldn't be able to survive, that we need this to continue on going. And so that feeling, it comes from these two processes which have been ongoing in Guam for the past 100 years. And I'm not going to give you as much history as I would like to because I don't have time, but we can refer to them as Americanization and militarization. And so Americanization is basically this idea where, and it begins in the pre-war period on Guam, where all progress is kind of understood as being achieved through not just any sort of improvement or development, but as something as achieved through an Americanizing. So all progress is achieved through making the island more American, kind of emulating the United States, following the United States example. And so in this view, kind of any problem that Guam has an American solution. It's very simple. You simply have to do what the United States has done at some point. And if there's any problems, really, it's this issue that Guam hasn't become sufficiently American enough to handle this issue or handle this problem. So as I said, this was a process that the U.S. Navy began before World War II, kind of during that period where it was very blatant. It was very much like you need to give up your culture, you need to give up your language, and you need to follow the United States, and that's how you will improve. But Chamorros, they resisted that. As I said, they didn't believe it. You know, they saw the United States Navy at that time as somebody who brought certain things into the island which they could improve their lives, but they didn't really see it as being their savior or as having all the answers to their lives. But with World War II, that changes completely. And so, if you read the kind of the naval documents about what they were going to do with Hagatna after it had been destroyed, it was this idea that, you know, we will remake Guam and we will remake it like Santa Monica, California. And that was like this key point in which the history from then is one of Americanization of Guam. It's where, where at the most private levels, at the most public levels, Chamorros have made decisions in which we develop our island and we improve our island, not based on the ground here, or the context here, or the situation here, or our means here, but by following what we believe to be is the American way of doing things. And so if you've ever wondered why the language is in such a poor state, it's because of that. Because after the war, everybody made these very conscious decisions that I need to give up the language in order to improve. That's the American way. But in terms of Chamorro music, it was the exact same thing. Chamorro music is very lovely nowadays, but for the 50s and 60s, if you were a band that played Chamorro music, you would be booed off stage, or you would be laughed at. If you wrote in the Chamorro language, it was hysterical because everybody wanted to be Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra, and that's what they wanted you to play. And so people who owned cars, people who didn't make their own tools, who didn't grow their own crops, these were the ways. The post-war period has all of these stories of Chamorros giving things up because of this idea that if we want to improve our lives, we need to do what Americans do. And so that has continued up until this day when we talk about different things about governing ourselves, about running our economy, running our educational system. Everything is this idea that whatever is good for the United States or whatever the United States has done, it's simply a matter of emulating that, bringing it into Guam, and that's the best way that we can approach it. And so one of the problems with this, of course, is that it causes a lack of imagination. It causes a lack of will on the island where it's just, well, what's it called? Well, so let me explain another. So I mentioned Americanization, and one of the kind of the biggest parts of Americanization has been a militarization of the island. And so there's a lot of different ways of conceiving militarization, but the way that I would like to kind of mention it today is through the way that Catherine Lutz, she's an anthropologist who came through Guam in April earlier this year, and so the way that she kind of described it. And so she came and she spoke at the university, she spoke to the people she spoke to some senators in the legislature too. And so her work is on how kind of civilian communities outside of military bases, kind of how do they deal with that, how do they survive, you know, what are their challenges and strategies that they have being outside of military bases. And so the main part of her research, although she does research all over the world, was on the community outside of Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And so she said that she stayed there for several years doing research, and she said that, there was all these interesting things where when the military population or when the military presence increased, there was all these things which would decrease outside of the bases. And so the more military money which came into the base, the less the local government, the civilian government decided to, the less the local government decided to look for its own economic development. The less people participated in voting, the less people cared about local governance. There was all these factors which she studied where just the community outside of the gates became disempowered, where they felt, where local politicians believed that the military money was what would sustain the economy, and so they didn't pursue any other options. Or there was also this idea where what would happen is the militarization in her research, it also would lead to communities not questioning their leaders or feeling that there was other leaders who were more important. So in North Carolina, she said that most people saw themselves not in terms of their local governance, but they saw themselves looking to Washington, D.C. more. And so what eventually happened was, as different places around North Carolina improved their economics, the place outside of Fort Bragg, it became worse. It progressively became worse because they weren't governing themselves. There was this idea that the military is here, we just need to rely on that money, and that's what we can sustain ourselves with. And so, I think we can see that clearly in our own case of Guam, that there is this idea that the military will provide money, and therefore we don't have to pursue our own plans. We don't have to come up with our own ways of developing ourselves or sustaining ourselves. We can just rely on the military. And the military has, its presence on Guam, and the fact that Guam is a strategically important location has definitely brought a lot to the island. So you cannot deny that. If Guam was not as strategically important, then the island would not have Americanized as much and would not have anywhere near as much federal funding as it does. But as a result of this, and I'm going to explain how we can see it in our lives, but the result is that Guam becomes a place full of people who can't take care of themselves. It's a place where we can't trust ourselves with governing ourselves. We can't trust ourselves with improving anything, with doing anything. And so Robert Underwood, who's not here, but his chair is here, I once heard him say, and it really struck me at the time, he said that Guam is a unique place in the world. And I was like, okay, why? And he said, well, because it's one of the few places in the world where the people there actually want more outsiders to control them. And I was like, And he's all, if you think about it, most places around the world are pushing for more local control. They want control over their own economy, over their own education systems, over their own histories. But if you look at Guam, it's this really unique place where everybody's actually calling for more outsiders to come in and take over things. And so, if you, in the past couple of years, every time there's news is announced that another GovGuam agency may be moved into federal receivership, obviously probably not here it's celebrated, but in the rest of the island, in the majority of people in the island, this is seen as a good thing. This is seen as a very positive thing, that finally the feds are coming in to take over, because they're the ones who can run it right. And if you think about it, every time there's an announcement that federal money is coming in from somewhere, even if it's $1, it's celebrated as this is incredible. It's like, this is super money. This is awesome money. And so so basically when we look at the decades of Guam's development and its progress since World War II, we can see that it's come to this place where it's developed quite a bit, but it hasn't looked to sustainability. It's always been this reliance. And the way that I like to put it is that, Guam, instead of planning for its future, it awaits its liberation. And that's always the way that I conceive of it. And in a lot of people's minds, when it was even first announced that the Marines were coming to Guam, that this buildup was happening, Congresswoman Berdalio couched it in the idea that this is another liberation. And for years after that, the Chamber of Commerce and others said that this is an economic liberation, that this is kind of going to make all of our dreams come true, this is going to provide so much for the island. And if you believe that, that's fine. But my concern is that this buildup doesn't kind of reproduce this sort of culture of apathy or this culture of disempowerment. Because that's really the problem here, is that Guam really needs to develop itself. It really needs to plan for itself. It really needs to plan for its own future. And if the military is a part of that, then Guam needs to assert itself as a partner, not a dependency, but as a partner. Thank you.
Jesus Mase, Senor. Kalan Tabdung Magay Palabrasmo. I am hoping that many were able to hear, I think, a very clear, deep sentiment that must be considered and must be faced by us who call Guam our home. Now, we are now at a time where we're going to be doing a little bit of question and answers, and I hope that that's acceptable with the panel. And we've been receiving all sorts of different questions. So the first one, I believe, is for Senator Pangilinan. And the question reads, the legislature has been criticized for continuing to appropriate funds to the Commission on Decolonization and its lack of action is in recent years, and its lack of action in recent years. What happened to the money appropriated to the commission, and what alternatives? I'm sorry, this is written very interestingly. What alternatives can be pursued to conduct the public education forum that's so badly needed on political status and scheduling of a self-determination plebiscite?
Thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate that question. Well, what happened to the money? It got spent. Did it get spent right? I don't think so, because we don't have, and we haven't made significant progress towards the vote for self-determination. Was the money wasted? I don't believe so. The money has continued to present the opportunity for the people of Guam to begin and continue to think about this issue of self-determination and the issue of the governance of the people of Guam and the right to determine their ultimate political status. One of the reasons why I believe we've not had the success that we want is, of course, the leadership at the top. We've not had a leadership that has supported this right to self-determination, that has asserted our right to self-determination, and has put people in place to move forward this right to self-determination. I sat on the Commission on Self-Determination for 2 years, and I got an interesting email the other day from another friend of mine who sat on that same commission at the time I did. And she said, I finally got off because I got tired of sitting. For 2 years, we never convened an official meeting of that commission because the head of the commission refused to come to the meeting, refused to call a meeting, refused to submit people who would come to the meetings. And you can't act without authority. And so we have been thinking about a way of restructuring the Commission on Self-Determination to not put it in the hands of a single person who can frustrate the process. The process can rise from the people, but the people have to have the structural support to advance what they wish. And we just haven't had that. So we are making some active discussions and thinking on a way to restructure the Decolonization Commission and the decolonization process that will result in action rather than inaction. And that's the current status of what the legislative solution could be to this failure on the administration to move forward this commission. Thank you.
Situus Masi, Senator. The next question is for Attorney Tedinko. I believe that you may, the CINTF chair, Mr. Lamarena, has stated that not a single MOU has been negotiated with the military to prepare for the buildup. Yet the Public Safety Committee has been meeting for 2 years. Please give one priority example of where a formal agreement with the Department of Defense is needed. What's holding this up? And isn't this what the CMFT is supposed to facilitate? Does Congress need to mandate this?
Okay, there's 2 or 3 questions in there.
Yes, very loaded.
I'll see. I'm not sure what the CMT is. That the Civilian Military Task Force? Oh,
yes.
okay. I think the first question was, what would be an example with regard to setting up an MOU or Memorandum of Understanding? Well, I think we could formalize, maybe not necessarily with Department of Defense, but certainly we have done informally, and it could be formalized, like on jurisdiction issues. Since the advent of Attorney General Limtiaco's administration in January 2007, of course, and many of you know me more in my role as the chief prosecutor until recently, we had a policy shift in how we dealt with military cases requesting jurisdiction or relinquishing jurisdiction. Our tradition and practice was to give great deferment, even on minor misdemeanors and DUIs, to the military, and we ended, for the most part, that practice, except for certain circumstances or extenuating cases, and I think we could formalize that. So that might be an example, as well as perhaps in a way of investigation, because you always have jurisdictional issues. I mean, there's sort of an unsaid, what happens on your base is your issue, but our role, at least our administration, is what happens outside your base is our jurisdiction. So I think those are understood, but certainly it doesn't help to, it doesn't hurt rather to formalize some of those understandings, because there are times, there are lots of gray areas. With regard to whether Congress should mandate entering into agreements, I don't see why that would be a bad thing, and so I would leave it to the policy makers to push for that if that's their desire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. The next question I have is for Senator Blas, and the question goes, why can't Guam insist that full compact impact reimbursement be a precondition for the military buildup rather than be treated as a separate issue? There are other issues that should also be used as preconditions. Examples are war reparation, cleanup of toxic sites, the political status resolution. These are all treated as separate from the military buildup, and they are all actually very, very well connected.
First off, thank you for the question. I personally feel that it should be a precondition. There are, as you had stated, there are a number of unresolved issues. There are a number of issues that directly affect a number of the mandates, a number of what Guam is expected to do to make sure that this buildup is win-win for everybody. And when you talk about win-win, you got to look at what those issues are that you're going to need to win itself. I don't believe that we've pushed those unresolved issues enough to the forefront so that these discussions should happen. You know, when we talk about quality of life, you know, and one of the concerns that everybody has with regards to the military buildup is that we're concerned about the quality of life. You look at these issues, and you're right; they're all interrelated, and they speak a lot to the quality of life. May not, you know, a war reparation may not affect you. But think about that individual who's been waiting 65 years for that. And think about the kind of stories that they're listening to. I mean, I met with a Manamko several months back. And the question that she had for me was, boy, we're making an agreement with the same country that caused me to have, or that basically ruined my life 65 years ago? What about my concern? So you know, to that individual, the resolution of the war reparations has got to be something that has to be resolved before we can even talk about this anymore. When we talk about compact impact reimbursement, over the last day and a half, you've been hearing about, well, we're going to need money to be able to do this, we're trying to do that, we're trying to get grants, we're trying to get loans. And then outside of this, outside of the discussions here, you hear about, you know, what's happening over the Department of Education, what's happening in Luzon, what's happening in ORDOT, you know, what's happening with our wastewater. You know, one of the things that we've got to do in the body that normally sits in here is basically find the monies to be able to deal with these issues. And sometimes the conversation goes to, you know, do we put this on the backs of our people again? Do we need to? Do we need to put this in the backs of our people, recognizing that there is, as a result of a mandate that we had no part of in as far as the discussions to put this together? Nobody asked us about the Compacts of Free Association and the effects that could happen. Yet we were told that we would have to be an integral part of it. And as a result of that, now, you know, we've had to spend some money to be able to, for those mandates to be carried out. Those are issues that need to be addressed. Now, and I'm saying this personally, that it has to be addressed. Before we can go ahead and talk about how we're going to widen our roads a little bit more so that we can, you know, the trucks, so that we can talk about a little bit more about how much, you know, what we're probably going to lose in as far as culture. Let's talk about those issues that have been languishing for many years. Don't put that aside anymore. Will it get resolved in the time period? Probably not. But you know what? It's time to start talking about it. Let's put it on the table and let's deal with it. Thank you.
Senator. And I think that leads right into our next question. Dr. Bavakwa, what do you see can be done to remove the almost, the institutionalized mentality of traditional Chamorro culture, language, and practices are on the same level as American culture, practice, and traditions, if that's even possible. I think right up there. I think you can turn it right there.
Hello? Oh,
Yes, there you go.
hello? Oh, well, there's a lot of things that can be done. One is that a lot of the anti-Chamorro barriers that used to be in place on Guam, they don't exist anymore. So for instance, you're allowed to speak Chamorro in schools now, and in fact it's kind of somewhat taught in schools. So, and a lot of the stigma that used to be associated with people who would speak English with a certain way or wouldn't be able to speak English very well, a lot of those things, and a lot of the ideas that you can't have two languages. You have to only speak one language in order to be really good at that language. Like a lot of those thoughts have gone away. They're not part of the formal laws or rules on Guam anymore. But what hasn't happened is the will. So for instance, now you can speak to your kids in Chamorro, but people just don't speak to their kids in Chamorro. And so I don't know how to get over that, because it's a lot of times a personal choice that people make where they may say to the world that it's very important and the language is so beautiful, but they don't feel that they don't feel the responsibility to teach it to their children. And so that's one aspect of it. But one thing that I would like to mention is that at the University of Guam right now, it's halfway through being approved, but there's going to be a Chamorro Studies minor. And then hopefully in a few years there will be a Chamorro Studies major. And so a core part of that will be Chamorro language. And so I'm hoping to be a part of that, because we can basically do whatever we want with it in terms of outlining and designing classes. So why I think this is very important is because, if you ask most people and this is one of the reasons why people feel so dependent upon the United States, is because if you ask people what is a Chamorro political philosophy, most Chamorros would answer, well, we have to think back to what Chief Kipua did or Chief Matapang, or they would say the Chamorro political philosophy is barbecuing and fishing. That's a lot of what people think. When you look into your own history, you think, well, actually, I don't know any great Chamorro political theorists or any political philosophers. And so then you can't really blame people if they think that, well, if I want to run this island, I have to rely on the United States to tell me how to do it, because I can't think of anybody in the past who has ever articulated a Chamorro political philosophy. And so one thing that I would love to do is start that conversation with those classes. So you have classes on what is a Chamorro literary tradition, what is a Chamorro political philosophy, and you combine with those classes in which you teach traditional practices and arts. You bring in the community, you develop apprenticeship programs, you develop intergenerational apprenticeship programs. That's what I really think is missing, is that if you want to teach a tradition, you don't teach it to one person, you teach it to that person and their child, or that person and their parent. Because then it becomes something which they take back into their family. And that's how culture works. If you simply give somebody the knowledge, it could just simply remain knowledge in their head. But if you give it to them, and it becomes part of their family, and it becomes part of their family tradition. And so that's why I mentioned the TASI group earlier that's working on the canoes and the traditional navigation, and it's really fantastic that they're doing that. But what I would really hope is that 2 or 3 generations from now, it's not simply a group of guys and a group of men and women down at IPA or down at Paseo who are making canoes and giving tours and lectures to classes, but I hope that in a lot of families around the island, this is something that you do. You carve a canoe together, you make a canoe, you have a canoe at your house that you take out. And that's what revitalizing and living culture means. It means it's not simply something on a book on your shelf, but it's a practice that gives you life and gives you meaning and gives you strength.
Sizos Mase. We have 2 seated senators in the panel. And one of the questions that has come forth is, how do we get the Department of Education to follow the laws in place that has propelled the Chamorro language program forward as a curriculum mandate and not a elective? And apparently, we are running into problems with this. So this is from some parents. How do we go around and ensure that the Chamorro classes are actually taught and not treated as though they are electives? I hope that's clear. That was a clear enough question.
Well, the way you would do that, of course, is the people who are responsible for running the Department of Education, the superintendent, the board, that they realize and they are fully aware of what the requirements are, and then you just hold them accountable. And if the parents feel this way, if the parents see this isn't happening, then they've got to bring it to the attention of the superintendent and the attention of the board, and then they have to then use the authority vested in the positions that they have over the people that are supposed to be doing and performing this function, and you hold them accountable. And it has to come forward from those that feel or know that this is not happening, and then we then can fix that. From the legislative side, you would have your normal legislative authorities over this with regards to oversight hearings, to assure accountability, to point it out, and to make sure that it happens. But that's how I would approach this.
With that in mind, do the panel members believe that the reintegration of the school systems on Guam, if that were to happen, do they believe that that would improve the quality of education for all students?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. Yes, I firmly believe that. But then it goes back to, and then the second question, the reason why I answered the second question first, because it delves right into my answer for the first question, as a good professor had stated here. We choose culture, or culture and how we practice it is based on our choice. And I think that, as a community, we can make that choice. One of the things that today we judge our students, we judge our children on tests that are basically manufactured, if you will, based on ideals and philosophies and the teachings that are expected of individuals that are elsewhere in other lands. If you look at some of the questions in that test, and some of the things that are taught to our children today, so they can pass these test scores, they got to know the 4 seasons. Really, what does a kid from Mauricio know about the 4 seasons? Okay, there's only 2 seasons on Guam, sun and rain. That's it. Okay, but then also, what are we teaching our kids in the schools? We're talking about the Chamorro, but also let's talk about the language. My wife is a 5th grade teacher, and I asked, what are you teaching in civics to your kids? And she says, we're teaching about citizenship. Well, I think that all of us, most of us that are sitting here, recognize that the citizenship as we know it to apply to us is a lot different than the citizenship that was taught to us. And so, what are we doing? Are we starting to teach our kids something that they wish they want to be? Yeah. Are we starting so that they can strive to be it? Or do we teach our kids what they need to know? Okay. Do we teach and so it goes back to the question, and as far as the perpetuation and how we teach the Chamorro language. Okay, we have to choose that, and if we choose that, we're going to stick to that. And I agree with Senator Pangilinan, and then we're going to hold them accountable to this. But those are the tough decisions, hard decisions that to me made. Now, going back to the integration, this will make for a well-rounded individual. How many more kids are going to be able to go out and say that when they leave Guam, they know more than one language? And they know more than one culture?
Senator. And the question that I have, the next question that I have, do we have time for this? Are we okay for time? And I believe that we have, the next question that we have is for you, Mr. Tedinko. If crimes were committed on Guam by members of the U.S. military, as they were in Okinawa, who would be the prosecuting authority?
Thank you, Debbie. Well, the Office of the Attorney General and the Prosecution Division, our jurisdiction geographically extends to all of Guam. That's just a general statement, legal statement. Factually, the way generally how it works, usually if it's outside of the federal properties, we usually exercise jurisdiction over crimes that are committed regardless of whether you're military or not. It's not really relevant whether you're a civilian or military person when you commit a crime outside of the base. On the federal properties, the jurisdiction is usually within the military or the federal courts, for that matter. Legally speaking, they'll exercise their jurisdiction. So that's typically how that works.
A follow-up to this question is, there have been crimes that have been committed against Chamorro citizens or residents of the island of Guam on federal properties, including accusations of rape and criminal sexual misconduct, where families have not been able to get results of what type of legal action was taken against the perpetrator because they are sent off island. How do we avoid these kind of problems?
Well, I would like to believe, and I tend to believe, that the military authorities and the federal authorities would not permit that to go unprosecuted. I would imagine that they would want to be treated the same way outside or inside the base. That is, justice is applied equally. But if that were the case, and I hope it's not the case, but if that's the case, then certainly if the statute of limitations has not run, then I suppose if they can provide the evidence and reasonable cause, it occurred on Guam, we could seek to file or present to the grand jury and decide where it goes from there. However, if there was a prosecution of the suspect or the offender, then we might, and he was prosecuted either under the U.S. Military Code of Justice or under federal law, then he would have been punished, and we wouldn't necessarily have jurisdiction because that may raise double jeopardy issues. But sometimes there's no double jeopardy as between federal and local law when the elements of the crime are different. I know I'm getting kind of technical, but I know that sometimes people go, but I know sometimes you guys punish the same person for the same act in federal court as well as Superior Court. That does happen, because like for example, in drug cases, they may be different types of drug charge. But typically what we'll do is we'll defer to one jurisdiction depending on who gets the most punishment and with regard to that individual's conduct. So especially if this occurred on federal properties. As I said, typically we don't exercise jurisdiction over those cases, and but it can, I suppose, in certain cases occur, but it'd be fact specific. So that's the best I can tell you, generally speaking.
Thank you very much for your answer. I believe that we have asked the questions that I see that I've been given. I believe that if there is any other questions, are there others? So I would like to take this time to thank our panel members. I have to say that I do know that you guys have had the hardest job, and it's a rough one. And with all situations, there are good sides and there are bad sides, and I think people have different views, and we somehow need to work through those together. Thank you very much for your patience and understanding. Have a very nice evening. Jesus Masi.
Thank you, Debbie Kanata, for being such a wonderful moderator. At this point, we will call Dr. Judy Gutherds to provide closing remarks on the 2009 Island Public Administration Conference of the Military Build-Out. Before you leave, it is really important that we get your evaluation forms. Our volunteers will be outside, and if you didn't get one in your packet, there will be evaluation forms at the back for you to fill out. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Judith Gutherds.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a very busy and informative 2 days. In particular, our conference day today was very helpful, I think, for many of us to learn more about the buildup from various perspectives. Just to sort of summarize what happened today, we started off with a very special presentation by Senator Roy Respicio, chairs the Committee on Federal, Foreign, and Micronesian Affairs. And Senator Respicio was very direct with his comments and stated that one thing we can do as a community with respect to the buildup is to always be involved and engaged, and to ensure that we keep our eye on everything that is said by our military counterparts and everything that is done by our government to ensure that the best interests of all the people of Guam are our focus. He also expressed his hope that all of us will give our time and effort to look at the draft environmental impact statement, which, by the way, was released today, and I want to commend our military counterparts for getting it out a day earlier here on Guam. We thank you very, very much. We know the community has been looking forward to seeing this document with great anticipation. And through a concerted effort, a cooperative effort, the leadership of Guam was able to convince the Department of Defense, as well as the representatives of the Department of Defense, to give us more time to review the EIS. We now have 90 days rather than the original 45 days. And based on what I have seen today, we're going to need all those 90 days to do a decent, proper review of the draft EIS. So Senator Respicio is, in his comments, emphasized the need for everyone in the community to be engaged in this review process and to do their part to participate. We also saw today a very informative presentation by the Undersecretary of Labor of the Department of Labor and Employment of the Republic of the Philippines, the Honorable Romeo Lagman. Undersecretary Lagman traveled all the way from the Philippines to be part of this conference, and his message should be one of reassurance to us. He said very clearly in his comments that it is not the intent of the Philippine government to take away jobs from the people of Guam. That's the last thing they want to do. He said we will be available to assist where we can assist, but our intention is never to take jobs from the people of Guam with respect to this buildup. He also said that they have developed a plan of action in the event services from qualified Filipino workers will be needed for the buildup, and that it is the intent of the Philippine government to work closely with the government of Guam and the military to ensure that all laws of the United States, all laws of Guam, all rules and regulations appertaining to foreign workers are strictly enforced and observed by the Philippine government and private companies in the Philippines, and that they would expect that the same would happen here on Guam and in the United States if their workers are asked to help with the buildup. Secretary Lagman also explained to us how the Philippine government goes about certifying skilled workers in the Philippines. What is significant is that no worker in the Philippines may leave the country who has not been certified to have the skills that he or she claims to have. And they go through a thorough vetting process through their government's overseas workers office within the Department of Labor and Employment to attest to the skills of the workers. This was a concern of Guam businesses, and it was asked during the open forum, how can employers ensure that the workers they hire, that may hire from abroad in the Philippines, have the skills they say they have? So the government of the Philippines does have a process to certify the skills of their workers. Today, we also had shared with us a presentation by Professor Jose Munoz of the Guam Community College. Professor Munoz shared with us the results of a survey that was organized by over 300 students of Guam Community College on the Guam military buildup plans. Professor Munoz explained to us that over a 2-semester period, students enrolled in various courses in the criminal justice program and the social science program at Guam Community College started to develop potential questions that they would like to include in a survey that would be conducted on Guam. In April of this year, the survey was actually conducted, and the survey results was very interesting. What we found out from the survey, and there were approximately 5 to 7 questions that were asked, the results of the survey showed there's still some skepticism and concern with respect to the Guam buildup, and that a lot of the survey questions indicated that people have a lot of questions about the buildup. They're not sure the effects will all be positive. They're optimistic, but they have a lot of questions. In discussing this with Professor Munoz after his presentation, both he and I agreed that we need to do another survey and continue the surveys periodically to compare the results over time. So he and I are going to work on this with, I think, some of the students also from the University of Guam and other areas to see if we can expand the survey and to publish the survey results and to compare it with previous surveys so we can see if there's any changes in the thought processes and thinking of people on Guam with respect to the buildup. This morning we had a special panel on public services and systems. It was moderated by Mr. Clifford Guzman, and the speakers included Fred Jarecki, who's the legal counsel for the Public Utilities Commission of the Government of Guam, Larry Perez, our Director of Public Works of the Government of Guam, Joseph Diego, who's the Area Director of the United States Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Office for the Western Pacific Region, Mr. Perry Taitano and Dan Tidinko of the Judiciary of Guam, Mrs. Maria Connolly of the Guam Department of Labor, who's our labor director, and we also had Dr. Claudette Ruin of the University of Guam School of Business and Public Administration. Each of the members of the panel spoke on a different topic this morning, and they shared, I believe, perspectives on the military buildup that will have a lasting impact in terms of what our government is doing and will continue to do or do new with reference to planning for this immense change that is going to impact our island should it proceed in a planned way. Mr. Jarecki said, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Public Utilities Commission, we can expect rate increases with or without the military buildup. This is for water and power and sewer services. And this is because our infrastructure on Guam requires upgrading. Of course, it will require a faster pace of upgrading should the military buildup proceed as it is planned, but we can all expect an increase in our water, power, and sewer rates over the next few years. Mr. Joseph Diego expressed the fact that many of us know here that one of the biggest issues facing our island and will face the island in greater proportion with a military buildup will be the availability of affordable and accessible homes to our people. But Mr. Diego also said that there are many unique housing programs available, sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture and other federal offices that could help Guam. He was also very faithful in addressing the issue of affordable housing by having accompany him to our conference Mr. Carlos Camacho from Guam, who has been engaged in various affordable housing programs. And Mr. Camacho shared with us some of his experiences in trying to promote affordable housing on Guam utilizing some of the programs of the U.S. Department of Agriculture for financial support. One thing both Mr. Diego and Mr. Camacho both agreed upon is that a big issue for affordable housing on Guam is availability of land. Land is at a premium, and we have read lately and heard lately of many large properties, older constructed properties being purchased by investors and by very large construction companies for conversion into condominiums and worker barracks. We've also learned of land parcels that have been sold in the private sector. And so the availability of land on Guam for promoting affordability in housing and accessibility of housing has become scarcer and scarcer. And this is one of the public policy issues that the Guam legislature needs to address, according to Mr. Diego and Mr. Camacho, as well as the administration. How are we going to find land and provide homes that are affordable and accessible to the people of Guam with the military buildup and even without the military buildup? Mr. Perry Taitano and Dan Tidinko of the judiciary talked about the needs of the judiciary with reference to the military buildup. They are projecting, based on their research, that there will be a tremendous increase in caseload in civil cases and in domestic cases and possibly in criminal cases, not because of potential actions by the military, but simply the sheer number of people that'll be increasing our population over the next 4 or 5 years, anticipated to be anywhere between 40 to 50,000 people more on Guam in the next 5 years. We're bound to see an increase in demands on the services of the judiciary of Guam. They have engaged the services through their various professional alliances with national organizations to do a master plan for the court system in order to be ready to make known their needs for the buildup. And they claim they will continue to advocate for more funds for the court, and they will use creative approaches to try to deal with the anticipated caseload increases. Mrs. Maria Connolly, of course, our Director of Labor for the government of Guam, talked about what her department projects and sees as the needs of the territory for the military buildup. And she said that the Department of Labor is committed to training the Guam workforce to meet as many of the demands that will come with this buildup in terms of jobs and skills. She said that the Department of Labor has organized itself to work on a regional basis with our regional island brothers and sister communities, as well as communities in the other parts of the Pacific and Asian region, to ensure that the regulations and rules that the Department of Labor on Guam has in place and the training programs it has in place will bring maximum benefits to our island and our people. Dr. Claudette Ruin gave a very lively discussion on Guam's economic forecasts for the future. And she made it very clear, ladies and gentlemen, that it's very difficult to forecast anything on Guam or anywhere else without good data. And that is one of the biggest missing ingredients we have today in our community, the lack of good, solid data accumulated over a long period of time that is needed to make economic forecasts and forecasts in other areas. But regardless of that, Dr. Ruin has taken upon herself the responsibility of developing an economic forecast formula for Guam, utilizing some resources that she has had available to her from certain grants, because she sees this as an absolute necessity. At the School of Business and Public Administration, Dr. Ruin also shared that the school is committed to support Guam's best interests when it comes to economic forecasting, the collection of data, and the unbiased presentation of that data. After a very good lunch, we went into our last panel for today. Our last panel for today talked about some of the federal territorial questions and issues and relations that remain in our community. Our university president, unfortunately, was not able to join us, but we had a very lively panel, including Senator Frank Blas Jr., Senator Ben Pangilinan, representing the Attorney General of Guam was the Deputy Attorney General, Phil Taidinco, and Dr. Michael Becavia from the University of Guam. Senator Frank Blas talked about a subject very dear to him and one he has championed in this legislature: compact impact reimbursements. And Senator Frank Blas believes and has said that we need to pursue this as a priority in our federal territorial relations because he feels that the planned military buildup may exacerbate this need even further. And he plans to participate as much as he can in making Guam's case for full compact reimbursement. He estimates that over $300 million is owed to Guam for compact reimbursement. In addition, Mr. Phil Taidinco, Deputy Attorney General, talked about the demands on the Attorney General's office and how those demands will be increased many times over with the planned military buildup. He made a strong case for more attorneys in all divisions of the Attorney General's office. He said that they are projecting a caseload, just with the present staff of attorneys, of 500 cases per attorney. Can you imagine if you were in charge of 500 separate cases, whether in civil, whether in criminal, whether in domestic cases or child support cases? How can you possibly keep up with that? Dr. Becavia from the University of Guam talked about culture, and he said, we shouldn't fear losing the culture of Guam, particularly the Chamorro culture, because of the buildup. He said, what happens to the culture depends on us, the people of Guam. If the culture means so much to us, then it is up to us to promote it, to protect it, to bring life to it, and to commit ourselves to it. His discussion was very motivating and very interesting, and he challenged the audience to be engaged in the culture, to promote it. Excuse me. And Senator Ben Pangilinan on Chamorro self-determination, obviously committed to this movement, committed to realizing this quest. He said that he is thinking of legislation to revamp the Commission on Decolonization because it has not met for 2 years. And he said that the Commission on Decolonization should not be dependent on just one person to call meetings. Therefore, he plans to introduce legislation which would revamp the commission so that it can meet its mandate. He also said that movement is occurring on the issue of self-determination, and all of us know that yesterday the Natural Resources Committee of the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives, gave its approval for an education program on political status options and self-determination for the U.S. insular territories, including Guam, American Samoa, and the Virgin Islands. And that is quite a movement from the Congress Natural Resources Committee. So he was very optimistic about that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, over the last 2 days, we've had tremendous participation in the conference. The audience has been wonderful. The students at the University of Guam have been very, very helpful. All of our partners that have participated in the conference have been very astute and very engaged. We want to recognize representatives from all sectors of our community that have stuck with this for the last 2 days. We also want to recognize our military counterparts for being here and listening and taking note of the discussions and the presentations. We are very pleased to say that on the occasion of this conference, that the EIS actually was released today. And for the people of Guam, this is a day before we anticipated receiving it. We thought that we would probably get to see some EIS documents tomorrow, but actually we're seeing it the same day that it's released in the United States. So we're very happy with that. We thank the Joint Guam Program Office for making it available to the people of Guam today. To the listeners and the viewers out there in TV land, just look up the websites. They'll be published in the newspapers tomorrow where you can access the EIS electronically, as well as you can call our offices, 472-5834. If you want the specific websites, we can give it to you. But the documents are now electronically available. And if anyone is interested in knowing more about it, they can call our offices at the legislature. The members of the legislature will have their copies today as well. And I understand the governor's copy was delivered to his office today, and copies to the libraries and all the essential dissemination points. Thank you very, very much to the organizers, all the help from the members of the legislative staff. Tremendous work helping to put the conference together, the students from the university, School of Business and Public Ed, the faculty, the administration up at the School of Business and Public Ed, the office folks from the Legislative Central, Senator Spicio's office and my office for contributing so much of their time to help contribute to this conference. And to the community at large, stay focused, stay engaged, ask questions when the public meetings are held in your communities on the draft EIS. Please come out and share your views. This is our time now. We have 90 days to make our comments and to share our comments on the draft environmental impact statement with our military counterparts. We hope to see you again next year for another conference. Thank you very, very much. Senator Respicio, would you like to come up? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Guthertz. And that concludes the 2009 Island Conference on Public Administration, the Military Buildup and Beyond. We are very happy to announce that this will be broadcast over the next 2 days. So those of you with MCV can tune channel 13 with GTH channel 21. Thank you everybody for your attendance and participation. Good night.